I'm here to talk a bit about the future of Boot. As many of you probably already know, the original maintainers of Boot stepped down at the end of last year. We're now working on other projects like R and R Studio, and then other Hoplon related things as well. So for those of you who don't know, Boot is the alternative to Leiningen, and I highly recommend it, especially if you're already using Leiningen. And it's a really powerful build tool in general. It's not just a build tool, it's also an ad hoc Clojure environment. So at my startups, we use it through and through for all of our application development, as well as in the cloud for building our infrastructure. So we run Clojure code that deploys Azure Web Services, VMs, a bunch of networking stuff. So it's super powerful. And we have a lot of really interesting, fun things planned for the next iteration of Boot, starting with a full code audit. The full code audit happened in around January, February of this year and highlighted a good half dozen things that need to really change in the code base to make Boot a maintainable build tool for developers moving forward as the platforms change, as well as Clojure starts spreading to other types of host platforms and things like that. The first thing that we're changing that hasn't been done to Boot yet is dual development tracks. So we're working on 2 different versions of Boot simultaneously so that each development track can focus on different objectives and goals without having to really impact one another. And a good example of this is what we have planned for the first 3.0 release, which is backwards compatibility with all of your existing Boot 2.8 projects or 2.7 or whatever you're on right now. So the goal with this is that you'll be able to port your projects right from your existing builds, upgrade Boot without really noticing an impact. And ideally, with the optimizations that we have planned for it, you'll actually get some performance gains. And then for version 4, we're taking that exact same version 3 code base and compiling it to native images. So if anyone has played with the Grail VM, Grail VM lets you take your existing Clojure or Java code and compile it to really small, really fast native binaries. And that's the goal for version 4. Now, version 4 is also going to be where we introduce all of the behavioral changes to Boot. So again, because we want to make version 3 extremely backwards compatible, we're not going to introduce anything that you can't, essentially we're not going to introduce anything that directly changes the behavior. If you want to do that, you'll have to directly opt into it. In version 4, those gates are being removed and the new behavior will become the default. And the reason that we're doing this is to align the project with the changes that Cognitech has been releasing with the DEPS tools and CLI and everything else like that, as well as break Boot into a series of libraries instead of one giant monolithic program like it is right now. So internally, a lot of things are going to end up changing with Boot, and I really hope that doesn't scare the people that are in the room right now that use it. It scared a couple of people that I've brought this up to already. If you take a look at Boot right now, like I said, it's one giant monolithic application. But really, the way that Boot is structured is that the beginning part of Boot is actually just a bash script. It normalizes a couple of the arguments that get passed into it and lets you pick where your Java path is for the Java executable. The second part of Boot is the Boot binary project. And the Boot binary project is the bit of Boot that handles the low-level configuration of Boot, which is the Boot properties file, your global user Boot properties file, and this is actually a Java app. So this is the piece that downloads the set version of Boot, downloads the set version of Clojure that you're going to be running with your project, all that kind of stuff. And then finally, that chain loads into Boot itself, which is the version that you've specified. And this is actually a mix of Java and Clojure. There's a very small Java shim that's used to handle the pod and class path isolation when Boot starts up. And then the rest of it is the nice Clojure stuff that we're all familiar with. So this is what Boot looks like today. And this is fine, but there's a lot of inefficiencies here, right? Entirely being Java. and then a little bit of bash. And the bash part really makes Boot difficult to be cross-platform compatible, and that's already kind of the first blocker that we run into when we want to start running Boot on Windows. Now we have to start encapsulating the whole JVM environment as well as bash to get it running. For version 3, the main part that's changing in the code base is that binary piece. That's being completely replaced with a pure Clojure implementation. So it completely replaces everything that the boot binary did, and does it in a much more elegant way because we're just using Clojure, as well as simplifies all of this, like all the startup that Boot does right now. There's a lot of duplication that happens between the boot binary and that little Java shim. And what we've been able to do is reduce that by shifting as much of the Java code as possible into this new Bootstrap project, and do it purely in Clojure. And then secondly, for version 3, that Java bit is going to shrink down quite a bit as things move over into Bootstrap, and we don't have to worry about it anymore. And then that's going to be the majority of the changes that happen to the initial code base, other than a few minor optimizations in the rest of it. For version 4, we're getting rid of that that bash script entirely, right? As we're compiling to native images, we're not going to need it anymore. It's going to be cross-platform compatible right out of the box. A whole bunch of improvements there. And then getting rid of that Java piece for the actual Boot project, right? That's going to be the only real API change that's going to break any of your existing builds. If you rely on anything that's currently in the boot.app namespace, get rid of that. It's going away. So this is kind of the direction that we want to be taking Boot, to make things faster, more convenient, get rid of all the Java stuff, move it entirely into a pure Clojure tool. And then why do we want to do this, right? So looking into the future, what does Boot actually look like on a long-term roadmap perspective? And the main reason that we're doing this is to make Boot platform independent. We want to make it a build tool that isn't just for building Clojure and ClojureScript apps on the JVM, but is universally cross-platform, right? So you can run it on Windows, you can run it on Linux, Mac, whatever you want, but also be able to compile any type of project you want. Right now, the biggest downside to the CLR version of Clojure is that there's zero build tools or tooling in general that's available for it. And that's one of the main things that we want to change. We want to take the exact same developer experience that you guys are familiar with and used to with Boot and let it run everywhere. That includes in existing Clojure environments. So by breaking Boot up into a collection of libraries instead of one monolithic app, you'll be able to chain load it inside the Clojure CLI and then enable Boot on top of any of your existing CLI projects, which is where we know a lot of people have kind of been shifting towards over the last year or so. So this gives you two different ways that you can run Boot, right? An existing Clojure environment or a native image for your host platform. Bootstrap project kind of lies on top of that handles all the low-level configuration pieces, and then that chain loads Boot itself. And the goal behind this, like I said, is platform independence. So we want to be able to get Boot to a state that you could run Java apps, you can run CLR apps, you can run Node apps, whatever you want to build with it. And then the last thing that I want to mention is that Boot has joined Open Collective. So we actually just received our first donation this week, right in time for this conference, which is super exciting. So I'm really excited to see what else the community can build with it, and especially where you guys will take the new versions of Boot as it starts expanding across other platforms. Thank you.